Hi everyone, my name is Abigail Estrella and I'm the Educational Programs Manager with the ACMA. It's a real pleasure to have you join us today for a monthly webinar on building careers in the pharmaceutical industry for scientific and clinical professionals. I am pleased to introduce you the ACMA Life Sciences Dr. Kiana Dixson, who is a pharmacist by training and subject matter expert on all things related to becoming board certified in medical affairs as well as career opportunities for scientific and clinical background. With that, I will turn it over to Kiana, who will briefly present an overview, which I think you'll find very helpful.
Thanks, Abby. So as Abby mentioned, I'm Kiana Dixon, and as a pharmacist with the ACMA, my role here as a Life Sciences Associate is to really provide information to not only ACMA, but also to interested professionals like yourself here on this webinar today, specifically about the life sciences industry. So again, thank you for all joining us today to discuss these different and multiple career options and the many opportunities that the pharmaceutical industry provides to those interested. My goal today is for us to really highlight those different roles in pharma, specifically in medical affairs. And these career options that we're going to talk about today, they're suitable for many professionals with a clinical or a scientific background across the life sciences industry, including, but not only just limited to PharmDs and MDs, but also our nurses and nurse practitioners. Again, anyone with a clinical background. I also want to mention before we start, how we'll actually approach questions this afternoon. So please ask your questions in the Q&A feature of Zoom. You'll actually find it, it may be at the bottom of your screen, I believe, or at the top. You'll see just a section with two text message bubbles that says Q&A. So Abby will actually be reviewing your questions and noting your questions throughout the webinar today, and we'll actually address those questions at the end. Okay. But first, before we dive into everything, let's start with a poll question. So we've actually included a few poll questions throughout the webinar today, and this is for us to increase interactivity and also for us to learn more about our audience and who we're talking to today. So what will happen is that you'll see a question, it'll pop up on your screen, and then you can then select the answer that best suits you. So the first question we have, which of the following best describes you? PharmD or B-Pharm, or any of these other degree specialties here. If you're a pharmacy student or a student of any other specialty, please click other as well. And I'll give you about 30 to 40 seconds on this question. All right, so let's see our results. Okay, so we've got 80% pharmacists or PharmD specialty today. So I'll go ahead and I'll keep that in mind. We have a few MDs as well, but I'll close this and we'll go ahead and get started with our next poll question. We have a second one. What do you hope to gain from the webinar today? We'll talk about a lot of things. We'll talk about those different career options. We'll talk about how you can become board certified, but we'll also talk about the pharma industry as a whole. So what do you hope to gain the most from the webinar today? And again, I'll give you about 30 seconds on this question. Alrighty, let's go ahead and see what we're looking forward to today. All right, gaining more information on career options. Awesome. So this is excellent. This is perfect. This is actually the information that you'll be gaining today. So if you have any questions after we go over the different functions and those career opportunities, please, again, don't hesitate to leave those in the chat for Abby. Alrighty, so to get started, we're first going to go over a quick overview of the pharma industry as a whole. So the pharma industry, if you're working here in pharma, you're really working somewhere along the drug development process, right? And one of these departments here on your screen within the pharmaceutical industry. Now, again, as an overview of the drug development process, this process includes multiple organizations and different teams along the pipeline, and many aspects of this process is handled by the individual pharmaceutical company, whose main goal, is to create drugs for patients and then get those drugs approved by the regulatory agency, particularly specific to their region. For example, here in the US, a pharma company would need approval by the FDA. But first up, we have the research or the clinical development team. It says it right in its name. Their role is to develop and to drive the research of a new drug or a new product for the pharma company. And this team really oversees all clinical trials. Next up, medical affairs. So this is actually the highlight of our discussion today, but again, just as a quick overview, the medical affairs team is probably one of the largest teams within a pharma company. If you look up what a medical affairs professional does, it'll tell you something about scientific communications, which is true. The functions of medical affairs are more broadly defined as data generation and data dissemination. And we'll actually highlight and dive into these specific functions next. Next up, we have regulatory affairs. So regulatory affairs, and the goal of this team is to provide strategy and guidance for other departments within the company when it comes to guidelines that are set forth by regulatory agencies. So how I imagine regulatory affairs and how I see this team is as a phone carrier, right? Because they manage the communications from the regulatory agency, like the FDA or the EMA on one end, and then on the other end of the phone, they have the pharma company. All right, next up, we have health economics and outcomes research. This team combines clinical data and economic data to really gain insight into a medication's value to patients. And we'll actually also go into this detail, go into more detail of this function also later. Finally, we have marketing or commercial. This function also spans the drug's life cycle from the very beginning, because this department has a heavy hand in building and tailoring the strategy of brand messaging of a drug and the pharmaceutical company. Now, we went over the different departments within a pharmaceutical company, and this sums them all up. We mentioned the details of each of these teams and each of these departments, but let's look at where specifically the medical affairs team sits. How does it sit as a team, but also how does it fit into that picture of building that strategy internally with these other teams here? So research and development, or R&D, and commercial. The first being that we see here, medical affairs is pictured as sitting in the middle, right? Sitting in the middle between R&D and commercial. But let's take a zoomed in focus and look more into medical affairs. So how can we define medical affairs? What is it? Let's first think of how we saw medical affairs before, right? It was sitting in the middle between different teams. Now let's imagine it more as a bridge. Medical affairs in this team, they're a bridge between the R&D team and the commercial team. And this is because, again, the functions of medical affairs are data generation and data dissemination. So the data that we get that's generated from R&D in those clinical trials, that data is then disseminated to the medical community, including HCPs, but also to patients. And remember who we mentioned that handles and tailors that brand messaging of a pharma company's product? That was commercial. And that's why we see them acting as that bridge. The medical affairs, they take the data that's generated from R&D and they use commercial to help disseminate that data to the medical community. And the medical affairs role is constantly evolving. We're seeing that the exchanges that we have with physicians and other healthcare providers are focusing on a higher scientific level, really when it comes to educating on disease states and different treatment options. And also with the rise of technology, we're also seeing a rise of digital capabilities, a rise in those digital tools that are giving the pharma company insights. And these insights gives an inside look as to what the healthcare system needs. And this strategy is largely handled by the medical affairs team. Now let's shift and let's take a look at the rise of medical affairs and how it relates to scientific exchange in the medical community. Here we can see the difference over time between PSRs, or pharmaceutical sales reps, which was traditionally a function within sales and commercial. And we're comparing it to MSLs, or medical science liaisons, which is a function within medical affairs. So here you can see that when the first data point that was ever captured of MSLs and their employment in 2005, sales reps, they were on the rise. But with this increased need of that high level scientific knowledge, we see this shift occur. And that's because PSRs, or those sales reps, they usually don't have a clinical background. They're very business focused, and they're very, sales heavy. But when compared to medical science liaison, who we'll also get into next, we'll get into more detailed dysfunction, MSLs have the background of many of you here, with some type of clinical knowledge, whether you're a pharmacist or a physician, or even PhDs and nurses as well. Looking at this slide of the deck, it shows the hierarchy of a medical team within a pharma company. But what I want to highlight here is that medical affairs is an umbrella term, because there are multiple sub-functions and teams within medical affairs, whether that's medical information, medical communications, we have medical science liaisons, and even this is not all inclusive. I just want to highlight here again, it's an umbrella term. Usually medical affairs is used interchangeably with just one specific function, but again, it's an umbrella term because it encompasses multiple functions. And we'll actually go into each of those roles and each of those functions within medical affairs next. But before we hop into, again, the details of each of those functions, let's see which function has the most interest by the audience. So everyone here, we're going to vote on, which function within medical affairs are you more knowledgeable of, and which ones do you have the most interest in? All right, so you can go ahead and take a look and choose the one you know the most information about, or the one you're most interested in, and I'll give you about 30 to 40 seconds here as well. All right, I see someone say they're interested in more than one. You can choose which one you're the most interested in, or you can choose other. So I'll give you about 5 to 10 minutes to make your selection. All righty, so let's see the results of this poll question. All right, so this is usually the disbursement of responses usually on this question. Medical science liaisons. So MSL and this function is the most common. And again, it's the most popular function within medical affairs. But I see we have some others that are interested in pharmacovigilance, HEOR, and also scientific communication. So I'm glad we have a wide variety. And we'll actually talk about each of those today. Again, so now we're going to shift our thinking, and we're going to dive into those details of each function within medical affairs. First up, we have med info, or medical information. Before taking a look at the description and the responsibilities of this role, you can see that I actually included little icons here on the screen as a hint to what this particular role does. So for med info, I have someone with a headset here, and that's because I picture a call center. They field and they answer different questions that come in from healthcare providers about their employers or their pharma company's product. So just for a real life example, let's say you work for a pharma company that just released, a new vaccine, right? A pharma company just released a new vaccine and you work in their medical information department. A physician wants to administer this vaccine to a patient, but she doesn't know if patients with other comorbidities should take this vaccine. So the physician then submits a question to the company that made this vaccine, aka your company that you work for. And now that it's submitted to this company, who answers this question? Who has to research the clinical trial data to answer this question with expertise? It's the medical information team. So with that being said, you can see why these skills here are important for this role. You have to understand how to analyze evidence-based medicine to correctly interpret the data. MedInfo, they also develop resources for other medical affairs functions that really interact with the medical community. And so it's also important to highlight here your writing skills if you're interested in this role. Within medical information, the average salary of med info professionals is around 70,000 US dollars each year. Moving to the next function that's up for discussion this afternoon, scientific or medical communications. Now, the icon we have here is a pen to paper, and that's because the focus on this role is medical writing. This team, they really develop and produce documents for the life sciences industry, and these documents can be developed and delivered in many different type of deliverables, like the traditional slide deck or PowerPoint. They can be posted as web pages and even blog posts. The need for this role will always be there because documents can be tailored, for the healthcare audience or even for the general population. So the skills that are required here is that ability to speak about science and healthcare in layman's terms, if ever required. The average salary for these professionals is around 89 US dollars annually. Well, not $89, $89,000 annually. But I'd also like to point out that as a medical writer, you can choose what type of writing that you want to do. There are options for you to work as a contract or freelance, as well as a contract research organization. Alrighty, so now to the most popular function that was voted on by the audience today. The medical science liaison, or MSL, is what is considered the field medical affairs team because, well, they're on the field. But what do we mean by on the field? They're out in the medical community and they're having these face-to-face conversations, or via Zoom now, post-pandemic life. They're having these face-to-face conversations with the leaders and those decision makers in healthcare. And these decision makers are also called KOLs, or key opinion leaders. Now you see the icon for this function shows two people across the table. And this is to show that there's a discussion between two different people. MSLs are liaisons of medical information. When medical science liaisons or MSLs meet with KOLs, they're participating in a scientific exchange on clinical data, on disease state information, and even on treatment options as well. So because you have to be able to hold a conversation on healthcare decisions and you're educating healthcare providers on these different life science topics, an MSL must not only have that strong scientific acumen, but they also have to have those strong business skills. You have to have a strong business mindset. And the annual salary in US dollars for medical science liaisons, they actually can range from 120 to 200K per year. All right, now we're moving on to the next function, HEOR. So HEOR is Health Economics and Outcomes Research, and their responsibility is to answer the question, is this worth it? So they help payers, they help government, they help physicians, and even patients to make sound and educated decisions. Here, when we mean decisions, we can equate decision-making to costs. And that's why you see the stack of change here as this function's icon. We're talking about money and payments. So how can HEOR answer this question of worth? How can we really assess the value of a medication? Well, we have to not only think about how safe and efficacious the medication is, but we also have to look at costs because we care about money, we care about payments, right? So HEOR professionals in this team, they combine that clinical data with economic data to really gain insight into a medication's value to patients. So because they're combining those two separate sets of data, that's why we have their title, right? They're comparing the health economics, AKA the costs, and also outcomes, so those patient outcomes. And they're researching this and they're combining that to give you that value. Now, HEOR, they're pretty new, but it's rising because the value of this team is being highlighted. Where it sits in pharma companies can actually vary from organization to organization. Some HEOR teams, they sit in medical affairs, and others, they may sit in commercial or reimbursement. Now we're on to pharmacovigilance. So pharmacovigilance really deals with safety. So the pharmacovigilance team, or what you may hear as PV, this team monitors the safety of a medication from the beginning stages and through the monitoring of the drug in the real world population, versus in a controlled setting that we saw in clinical trials during phases 1 through 3, right? We want to see that real world data, that real world use of this product or this medication. Because they're monitoring that medication from the very beginning and even through post-marketing, this team can work directly with clinical and research and development in those beginning stages, as well as even with marketing and commercial teams. So someone in this function, they have to understand those implications of risk versus benefit. They have to, and they must answer that question. Are the benefits outweighing the risk? You probably hear this a lot, but pharmacovigilance, this is their main focus. The average salary or the annual salary for someone in this function has a wide range, but the average here is around 140K in US dollars a year. So now that we've discussed the different functions, we're going to ask you actually the same poll question again, but we're interested in now understanding which area of medical affairs or which function are you most interested in after learning more and hearing the salary, hearing the details and the skills required. Which ones are you now most interested in? All right, so I'll give about 10 more seconds on this question. All right, so let's see what the audience says now they've learned a little bit more. Medical science liaison, still in the lead, but we're still seeing that the spread of interest among the other roles and functions within medical affairs also. So now that we kind of gone through the different functions, how do you get there? What are the different pathways to build a career in medical affairs? So there are many options. I've listed 3 here, and we'll actually go into each together. So the first one of them being direct to industry. So what this means is that wherever you are now, whether it be in school or in a non-pharma related role, you jump straight or directly into an industry role without any extra training. Another option I've listed here are fellowships. So many pharma companies, they offer fellowships where you can gain 1 to 2 years of hands-on experience within a specific department at their organization, depending on your background and your degree. And finally, another pathway into industry is extra training through board certification. So by becoming a board certified medical affairs specialist, when you're applying to these industry roles and medical affairs functions, hiring managers and directors, they'll actually see that you're an expert in this field. So because there are multiple options that we've seen so far of getting into medical affairs, let's review some of these opportunities, but also review some of the challenges, that comes with each of these routes. And we can kind of figure out which best suits you. All right, so first up, we have direct to industry. So wherever you are now, you go directly into a role without any extra training. So some opportunities of how you can begin making that shift directly to the industry are internships. Also applying to those entry-level roles like med info. This is considered an entry-level role within pharma. Also networking with others within the industry, either before or even after you've landed this entry-level role. Once you have an entry-level role, if your final end goal is something that's not considered entry-level, network with those who are in the role that you aspire to be in, because they can give you those insights. They can give you the insights as to how they got to where they are. And also, again, leveraging your past experiences in scientific knowledge. I can go on this about it forever, on and on how you should leverage your past experiences, whether that's on your resume or interviews, but that's something we can discuss later. You can hit Abby, her email inbox, or myself as well. We can discuss that. If you're looking at ways to enter the industry for a higher pay, these direct to industry or entry-level roles can be challenging for you because they're offered at a lower pay than other roles that require experience or they do require the extra training. And because usually applicants to these direct roles have little to no experience, recruiters and hiring managers, they like to see tailored education specifically to medical affairs field, just so they know that you have at least been exposed to this role, right? And that you know what you're talking about. Okay, and fellowships. Looking at these opportunities, we've already mentioned these. They're are many fellowships out there that are open to many terminal degrees, like for pharmacists, PhDs, and MDs as well. With fellowships, you actually gain hands-on experience, and you're building these direct connections with the pharmaceutical company and those in those roles within that company, if that's your goal company to work for. When we're looking at these challenges, they really depend on the fellowship. The first being a lower pay. So fellows, their compensation can range from about 40 to 50K each year. And these are usually geared towards doctoral level degrees. So if you're not on that doctoral level, it may be harder for you to find a fellowship. And finally, board certification. So becoming board certified in medical affairs is what we're seeing as this new trend. You know, how can you gain more experience and become an expert within the industry? Because becoming board certified shows that you have taken the initiative in understanding the industry and understanding how medical affairs teams work and how they work across the entire pharma industry. How do they work cross-functionally? But you're also taking a driver's seat, right? You're taking a driver's seat in your career and your personal professional development by taking that initiative and becoming board certified. So there are actually multiple board certifications out there and are available to you, but let's highlight ACMA's BCMAS program, because not only is ACMA an accredited organization, but the BCMAS program provides you with, again, not only the educational training, but it also helps you to build your business acumen and those soft skills, which are an absolute must have when working in medical affairs. So if you're interested in the program, let's go through this column here together. So it's actually the second column here under ACMA BCMAS. And you can enroll in the BCMAS program if you have either of these requirements listed here. So one of these degrees, an MD, PharmD, or PhD, or at least 2 years of experience in the life sciences industry. So these are the requirements, the eligibility requirements to sit for the board certification exam. When enrolling, you actually gain access to 20 e-modules, which are all available online to you. And this is important because you can actually work at the program at your own pace. You can actively work on career development whenever you like and wherever you like as well. This is one of the most high quality comments that we get about the program from our learners, because they're usually working in other fields, whether that's retail pharmacy or they're in a practice. They are glad they are able to afford that extra time to work on it at night or early in the morning, because they have that self-paced availability to them. And finally, how can you stand out? Okay, we've gone through the different functions, we've gone through the different routes and different pathways to medical affairs, but how can you stand out on your resume, on paper? Because what we see here is that for each medical affairs or medical science liaison opening, there are about 200 applicants on average. So if you have 200 applications on your desk, how do you decipher who stands out and who does not? So I've actually listed a few bullets here of what you can start today, if you want to begin your journey and build your resume. So first are professional development. So there are many opportunities out there for leadership workshops, mentoring. There's many mentor programs out there. Again, network with those around you who are in the role that you aspire to be in. Next, we have speaking engagements. We mentioned, as you heard throughout many of our medical affairs functions that we've gone over today, you have to speak to others. You have to be a great speaker. The only way you can, hone in on your speaking skills is to speak. So sign up for those speaking engagements, sign up for those speaking workshops. Next, we have writing samples. Again, many of those functions, you have to participate in some type of medical writing. So begin freelancing or contracting out for life sciences industries. And then finally, becoming board certified. Again, this shows to others that you've taken initiative, and the ACMA BCMAS program is always available. You can sign up whenever you like. So my hope today was to shed some light on the different options available to you, whether you're still in a graduate program and you're looking ahead, if you're looking for entry-level roles, or even if you're an experienced professional in your field and you're just exploring the different options available to you in pharma. Either way, we hope you gain some insight in those different opportunities and the different avenues that are available to you. But with that, I'll leave this screen up for a while. So this is both Abby and I's contact information. So you can screenshot it or write down this information while we go through those questions that came in during the webinar. So Abby, let's go ahead and take a look and see what questions we have so far.
Thank you, Kiana, for sharing all the detailed information with us. So we have received questions from our audience. So the first question is, can a pharmacy student get board certification, or is it only after getting the degree?
So it's only after getting the degree, but if you're in pharmacy school right now, we actually have an introductory course available to you. And it's called the MAC program. So that's the Medical Affairs Competency Certificate. If you reach out to Abby or I, we can give you more information on that program.
Thank you. The second question is, I am a med info specialist, but I want to be an MSL and I'm having a hard time getting past interviews. What do you recommend?
So whatever company you're working for, I recommend you to leverage your network. Leverage the company that you're working for. If it's for a pharmaceutical company, reach out to those MSLs within your company and ask how they broke into their role. Ask the hiring managers, what can you do? You already know their system, you know those clinical trials, you know what product or medication that they're dealing with. So you have that inside knowledge and you have that inside look. So for you, I would recommend, again, number one, networking.
Next question is, can I become board certified in medical affairs if I only work as a family physician previously?
Yes, you are eligible for the board certification to enroll into the course.
And the last question is, I am a physician. Do I have a good future in pharmaceutical if I change from clinical career to industry?
Yes, that's exactly who they're looking for. You have that practical experience, that clinical experience, hands-on with patients, and using that insight and that knowledge that you gain throughout your clinical practice is actually great insight to a pharmaceutical company because you're speaking to other physicians. And so you can use, again, your past experiences as a physician when speaking to other physicians.
Thank you, Kiana, for answering all your questions, and thank you everyone for joining us. If you have any question, please do not hesitate to contact me or Kiana. This is the end of the webinar.